We're going to start off showing a little bit on how to do some mosaic setting. This works for floor or wall, so the method is the same. Walls can be a little bit more tricky whenever you start trying to set on those, especially around outlets, but the method remains consistent. The one thing we want to talk about first, if you're going to do it, I understand it's technical, but you should understand to a degree the technicalities of this. We want our bond coat or the thin set mortar to have good coverage on the back of our tiles. And you'll understand more what I'm talking about in a minute. One thing we definitely want to do is use the flat side of our trowel and key or burn the mortar into the substrate. And then we like to use directional troweling. So you don't see swirls or you don't see other things like that. And when we get into doing what not to do on the big tile, that's going to make more sense. And so in a dry location, what we want is a minimum of 85% coverage on the back of a tile. And so to achieve that with mosaics and some of these smaller tiles, the best thing to do is to comb your notches in one direction. We do what's called kind of priming up the edge of our trowel. We're just getting a little bit of a ring of mud on it. And then we're just going to pull straight across and try to flatten those ridges. And you can see how the ridges flatten right up. We're just going to take and set our mosaic down into that and gently tap it down. Now my coverage may not be the greatest because I'm not on a solid. The board underneath me can move, but I expect when we go lifting this up and checking, we're going to find that I'm still really good for coverage.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
85%. We're definitely exceeding that by a lot.
That's really.
And so that's a method, a good technique for setting the 2x2s. And again, we're kind of do the same thing here real quick with I won't set a whole sheet of pennies, but just to kind of get the thing started, prime the edge of the float. We're just going to start over. We'll barely knock it over. So we just want to knock the ridges down. And then again, if you got sheets laid out already, I find it better to kind of pull the pennies over and then just let it kind of drop in place once you get it where you want it to go. Pennies are a challenge. And again, we just want to kind of tap it into place. And another thing to point out on this is it's not 85% for the whole sheet. It's 85% of each individual tile. And so it's not good enough if we're covered here really good and here really good and there's some voids. If any of the tiles have voids underneath, that's a bad thing. And so we're shooting for 85% of each and every tile, having a good bed of mortar put on it, and just look at that. I mean, that is what we want to see. You can see how it pulled up there, how much is stuck to the backs of the tiles here. That's really good. I mean, that's what we want to see. And on the last thing that we'll show again real quick, just kind of the same thing. And you're going to see here pretty soon what I'm talking about with poor coverage when we start doing the do nots with the 12x24 here. And so again, on a linear glass mosaic, it's kind of the same deal. I mean, a lot of mosaics have the same method of installing. A grout float works for this. You can also use a small piece of 2x4 and a hammer and just lightly tap on the top to set the tile into the mortar bed. And so,
see now that one.
This one probably could use a little bit of a taller notch.
Yeah, a taller notch.
And so, again, some of this is going to be tricky because of the substrate having a little bit of give to it. But we'll just for this one, we'll step up to 1/4 by 3/8, so it has a little bit more mud bed thickness. And we'll prime it up. I know it has a little bit of mortar on the back of this tile already. Just gently lay it in place. And that should kind of get it set in there, and we'll check now. We should have a lot better coverage on the back. It is a lot better. It may still not be quite what we're looking for.
Yeah.
But again, getting into some of this with this board, you can feel it has some give, and so it's not rigid like it should be. So we're not going to get the exact same results as a real life situation would, but this is just kind of to show. The other thing to point out here is this is what you need to be doing as you set your tile. So you need to set your tile and pull it off and check for coverage as you're setting to make sure that you're getting a good bond coat. So we'll set this guy out of the way real quick. And probably the last thing I want to show, we'll go back to this 1/4x1/4 trowel. We are also on this using a Schluter set. We're not using a modified thin set mortar. And so it's going to have a little bit of a lack of sticking power there as well.
Is that a good idea to
No.
back butter since we're just trying to show coverage?
Well, I was going to on this.
Okay.
Maybe.
That's fine.
One thing, and you'll see it on the right way of doing things. We don't have to back butter on tiles this size. One thing I want to point out is, again, to get the coverage that we're looking for with the 1/4x1/4 trowel, we pull the notches in one direction. We give the tile a wiggle perpendicular to the notch. And so you saw I went back and forth about the distance between the notches there. We will pull that up, and you can see
Man,
how
that's
good
awesome.
the ridges collapsed. You don't see any trowel lines. That's what we're looking for. I mean, that's a tile that once it sets on the wall is never going to come off. Not without a lot of work. And so now let's kind of start showing you a few of the do nots, things that we see a lot. One thing we see a lot is swirled notches. And so if you swirl, and it's hard for me to do that. It still wants to pull straight. If you swirl your notch like that, let me even see. I don't think I'm quite big enough. I'm pretty close. If you swirl your notches like that, it's going to trap air, and it's going to be really hard, no matter what you do, to get your tiles to collapse down like it should. We see a lot of 12x24 tiles being set with a 1/4x1/4 notch trowel, and so no matter how much we try to wiggle and move, and I just set it right down into the mortar. I mean, you can see all the voids there. You can still see all the ridges standing up. That's definitely not 85% coverage. It's better than what we see on a lot of jobs, but it's not what we'd want to see on our job. If we start stepping up and getting to a little bit taller of a trowel, and now it's going to end up kind of skewing the numbers some, because if we backbuttering, which is just using the flat side of the trowel to key the mortar in, if you back butter, it does increase your bond for the substrate by about 30 to 40%. So even if I use this 1/4x1/4 trowel to set this big tile, if my substrate is perfectly flat and I don't have any other issues, I may get the coverage that we're looking for, but it's going to be difficult to do that with every tile. You'll also notice that we don't, on these tiles here, just a wiggle back and forth is all it takes to collapse the ridges. We don't need to be beating the tile in with a hammer to get the coverage what we want.
Yeah, see.
And so you can still see ridges. I mean, it's got a few that are collapsed, but this is still too small of a trowel. And one thing you can really kind of see too, these tiles have a dome, so the middle is always raised. And you can see I have better contact on the edge and very little contact here in the middle. And so, which is why when we do this kind of a tile, we also want to use a 33% offset instead of 50-50, because a 50% offset, you have the highest point of a tile lined up directly across from the lowest point of a tile. We'll go to the 1/4 by 3/8. So we're going to get a little bit more thin set just to kind of show that this will make a difference in contact. We'll definitely get more mortar connected or transferred to the back of the tile. It will help. It's not the size that we would use for our job. And so when we go to setting this, we'll step up to a 1/4 or to 1/2 by 1/2. But I just want to kind of show real quick that 1/4 by 3/8 may be big enough, but I think it's still going to be a little bit on the low side. We wouldn't want to go any smaller than a 1/4 by 3/8. That's for dang sure. Another thing to kind of point out, I'm going to slip the edge of the tile and try to slide the tile towards me while lifting to break bond, instead of just trying to lift straight up. And so that got a little bit better. You can still see some ridge marks and things. And so again, this is not the size that we would use or recommend for this tile. We'll step up here and use a 1/2 by 1/2, and that's what we're going to use to set the whole job. And this will put a lot more thin set mortar under the tile and just give it a much better bond. Again, we're pulling our notches in one direction, no swirls. So again, we'll gently set it down in place. And you can actually kind of hear it hissing a little bit as we push it in and wiggle it side to side. This is going to give us the coverage and the look that we're going for.
You can get it up.
Yeah. What happens when you get older.
I really don't want to let go.
No.
See, that's 100%.
But yeah. That's what you're looking for, is all these great big stalactites pulling down and pulling up. I mean, that's the coverage. I mean, we know that we're not going to have any problems. Most of the time, I'll be honest and say that fresh tiles that we set are harder for us to pull up than tiles that have been set on a lot of jobs for many years. And it's just because they don't have any contact to the mortar bed underneath. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to click the subscribe button. Don't forget to ring the bell to keep updated with our latest videos. Also, be sure to check out the next suggested video that's going to pop up as well. Thank you very much for watching.